There have been two conferences recently which has attracted the markets. First of all, the big one, COP26, where people were talking about renewables. We've been hearing a lot more about the government's move and trying to encourage people towards using energy coming from renewable sources. So we've got a long list of minerals that could be of interest there. Plus the fact our next guest returned to the conference circuit last week and did so face to face, which was a nice change on from the 18 months of turmoil the sector's faced. We've been on Zoom calls with each other, but that doesn't quite cut the mustard. John Meyer joins us now from SP Angel. John, it's interesting, isn't it, listening to what you were saying last week about your return to the conference circuit. It must have been a big relief to be able to see people in the eye to eye again.
Yeah, it was jolly nice getting back together again and sitting down face to face opposite these guys and talking through the work that they're doing with the projects, because going to conferences is not just about learning about the projects, but it's about giving the guys some appreciation, because they're out in the field or back in their offices working hard, making these projects work, and they really want to get out there and tell everybody about it. And of course, at the end of the day, they need to pull together the finance to build these projects in many cases. And of course, they enjoy having a few beers with everybody afterwards, which of course is a big part of the mining game.
Yeah, how much of the conference you attended last week was centered around the discussion that I mentioned about the fact that COP26 has happened and we're, as I say, steered towards or directionally involved now towards renewables? Did this take up much in terms of time at the conference you were at? I mean, clearly it's something that's going to have to occupy our minds quite heavily in the next few years.
Well, environmental, social and governance issues have for a long time been a big part of the mining industry. And if companies are not cognizant of that, they're going to fail in one way or another. Maybe not initially, but they will eventually. And we see news this morning that Hochschild is under threat of having some of their mines closed in Peru for environmental issues. So we'll see what the backstory is there. When it comes to COP29, what that really is about is reducing carbon emissions. And lots of these mining companies are more than happy to work to reduce the carbon emissions that are produced when making metals, not just in the mining process, but also in the refining, the smelting and refining processes. And there are people out there looking to finance or refinance the way that power is generated. In fact, going back many years, when I started my career in the Cornish tin mining industry, most of the equipment was electric. The underground trains were electric. Everything within those mines was run on electric power. So the mining companies are not strangers to not using diesel and actually using electric machinery for most of what they do. In fact, it's hugely preferred for underground mining because it's an underground situation, and you really don't want to have diesel fumes and things in those confined spaces. So what's really nice is to see the mining industry go back towards electric.
I was going to say, and of course, in some cases, these mines are in fairly remote places and they can erect these large windmills, I guess, without too much trouble to drive some of the electricity. Let me just quickly talk then about some of the metals associated with that particular business, because we've seen battery metals continue to outperform. What are you watching for in terms of this space in the immediate future?
Well, the lithium price is going pretty crazy right now. It's more than quadrupled over the last year, and that is beyond anyone's expectations. Battery manufacturers who've been growing fast, actually probably growing as fast as any of the projections had forecast, are now struggling to find the raw materials, something we've been talking about for a while. But reality is always a little bit different from forecasting, shall we say. And lithium spodumene prices of over $2,000 a ton are remarkable and demonstrates how keen these mega factories and gigafactories are to get into that space. It's not just copper prices and tin prices and nickel prices that are going up. It's everything across the board in relation to electric vehicles. And then, of course, let's not forget the rare earths, which are particularly important for the permanent magnets for the motors for the electric vehicles, and also for the wind farms, for the turbines for those wind farms.
What sort of companies are you watching in this space? I know you've got clients that are involved in this area. What can you say in terms of some of the companies that are offering up exposure to lithium and battery metals?
Well, I guess we're fortunate in that we worked hard to get involved with the key lithium, copper, and tin companies on the AIM market. So in the lithium space, we're working with Iron Ridge, Kodal Minerals, and Savannah Resources. And all three of those companies are looking to produce lithium in the form of spodumene. And spodumene is a key raw material. Some companies up in the Atacama produce lithium from lithium brines, and that's fine. They require huge evaporation ponds, which you can see from space. But lithium in the form of spodumene is a hard rock product, and that is generally exported, well, almost exclusively exported to China, where they process that into lithium chemicals for battery manufacturing.
What about some of the other metals that you are involved with along the battery subject? Tin, for example. I know you've got some exposure to tin. What's happening in that space? We don't hear too much about that, but it does have a close association with the battery business.
So we act for Cornish Metals, and we also act for Bushveld Minerals, which spun out a company called Afritin recently, or a few years ago. And Afritin is now producing tin in Namibia. It's a relatively small operation, but it has lots of room to grow. And they're also going to add tantalum and lithium in the form of petalite. Now, at the moment, petalite is used by the glass industry, glass and ceramics industries. But it's possible that petalite might become a feedstock for lithium battery chemicals going forwards. And if we look at Cornish Metals, working in Cornwall, has the old South Crofty tin mine where I started my career. And they are looking to develop, well, they are currently drilling at the United Downs site with some tremendous copper and tin grades coming out of that. Now, my colleagues tell me that I need to be slightly less excited about this than I am because the grades are so high, but they need to discover enough of this material to formulate an economic plan for a proper mine. But there's lots of infrastructure into the area, so it's very important that what that means you could speed up production and there'd be lower capital costs to get into production. And they already have a fully permitted processing site over at the South Crofty tin mine. And in fact, ultimately, I think Cornish Metals will end up developing 2 tin mines in Cornwall. There'll be United Downs and then the South Crofty mine after that. So you might get two assets for the price of one, so to speak.
I want to talk about copper because we quite often reference copper. One company we haven't spoken about for a while is SolGold. You and I were talking before we went to air with this interview, and you were talking there about the asset that SolGold has got. Despite the name of the company, it is big in copper, but it hasn't yet got this mine up and running. What's going on at the moment with SolGold? Because I'm hearing that copper remains in big demand. Its copper price is just below 10,000 a ton at the moment on the LME. And I know that many, including you, have got your sights on higher numbers than that. But there are some copper mines still to come online. And SolGold, my understanding is, own a fairly substantial acreage, which will supply some of that copper, subject to it being produced.
So SolGold has a new chief executive, and it's his job to take the Alpala project and turn that into a mine in future years. And it's a very, very big project. I mean, this would rank amongst the world's largest mines if it was put into production. And it's not an easy one. So in my view, this gives the company as a baseline of value. But I think there's a lot more value to come from the exploration portfolio within SolGold. So they have the Porvenir project, which is already looking very interesting. They have another new starter pit up at next to the Alpala project, which I think might be something that would help the main project get up and running. It's a bit like a starter motor for a nuclear power station. So it's got lots of potential, but for me, the real excitement in SolGold going forwards is the exploration upside more than the current Alpala project.
How big is the Alpala project? I mean, you were saying it's almost too big to manage for a company this sort of size. It's a bit like the snake eating a goat, isn't it? When you get these big snakes that they try and ingest these great big animals. And it takes so long for the animal to end up getting down to the snake's stomach. By the time that happens, of course, it's a far smaller being. But it feels a bit like that for SolGold. Where does it go on the Alpala project? Does it sell it? Does it persist with the exploration and development? What's its best case?
I think there's a pretty good chance that SolGold will get taken over by BHP or Newcrest. Both of those huge groups are already invested in SolGold. This is the sort of mining project that would more likely to be built not just by one big mining company, but by two or three, because the capex would be so large. The technical expertise is not so easy to find. It's the sort of project a big mining company would like to take on and champion, but the capex is so big that I think it wouldn't necessarily be just one major, it would be two or three. So only time will tell who steps in to make this work. But at the end of the day, it's not likely to be SolGold. It's more likely to be BHP, Newcrest, Rio Tinto, or even Anglo-American.
Just want to take the interview back to what I said at the top about COP26. And one of the big subjects there discussed was the re-engagement, I think, that the international community is trying to be persuaded to have with nuclear energy. 20 odd years ago, when Fukushima happened, the tragedy that struck there, everybody was prepared to walk away from this. And I think, in fact, the time Germany said it wouldn't touch nuclear again. Now it's becoming an option again. I know uranium prices have risen. Is there much more, do you think, in the uranium price on the upside and those companies associated with this? What's your thought, your best guess on nuclear and therefore those companies involved with producing those metals?
Well, yes, the uranium price has been depressed for a long, long time now. I mean, it was hammered after the Fukushima disaster, and then there was an oversupply as a result of so many nuclear power stations being closed in Japan. Now those are gradually reopening again. We saw very recently a little bit of news out of China about their program of construction of nuclear power stations and plans for new nuclear power stations. And the Chinese are pretty quick at building things when they get round to it, although they have had a few issues with some of their own nukes. But what we are also seeing is in the United States, Bill Gates is behind a new design of nuclear reactor. We've got news from Rolls-Royce over here, which many people will have seen, about building smaller mini reactors, effectively building those in factories where they can control the construction very carefully and very much more carefully than you can in the field, and therefore putting a whole series of these around the country. And that certainly gets my vote. I think that's a very good idea. And there isn't going to be the uranium around because nobody's been investing or financing uranium mines for at least a decade. And in fact, there wasn't a lot more of that going on before then either. So yes, the uranium prices can certainly go higher than here because we're not even at the point that incentivizes new construction just yet. So yes, there are a couple of funds that investors can play with. There are ETFs and things like that. So uranium certainly a very interesting field, I think, for an investment from an investment perspective.
Just one final question. You remind me of a recent story that's developing, and that is Rolls-Royce. You mentioned Rolls-Royce in the context of what's happening in the reactor sector. But Rolls-Royce has just produced an aircraft, I think, that's gone at excess speed for electric vehicle. This is an interesting point, isn't it? The electrification of air travel. And it certainly seems like that's the new thing to go for. I guess it might make you, as a mining analyst, salivate at the prospect of seeing electrification of the air fleet. I mean, this must be something that's really only a few years ago would have been something in science fiction books. Now it's becoming a reality. So I guess this just engages us more with this electrification.
Well, there's so many advantages of using electric motors to power aircraft, and it's definitely a way to go. It's just a question of how do we fuel those aircraft when they're up in the air. So I think the scientific community is heading towards using hydrogen, either stored in the form of ammonia or stored as liquid hydrogen, probably in the wings of the aircraft, and then using that to fuel either combustion engines burning hydrogen, or more likely electric motors having converted that hydrogen into power using fuel cells.
Interesting development. That's no longer science fiction. John, we'll leave it there, but thanks indeed for joining us. John Meyer from SP Angel with an update on some of the news around in the mining sector at the moment. For more videos from us here at IGTV, join us on Twitter at IGCom, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.